Welcome to the debate. Um, Imagine you are standing in the middle of a sprawling foreign city.
Somewhere like Tokyo, maybe?
Yeah, let's say Tokyo. You don't speak a single syllable of the local language, you have no map, and yet you possess a wildly advanced translation app on your phone.
Right.
Suddenly, you can negotiate a cab fare, order a highly specific meal at a hidden restaurant, and navigate the labyrinth of the subway system, all without knowing a single rule of Japanese grammar.
Because you just speak your intent and the app handles the mechanics.
Exactly. And today, we are asking if a nearly identical phenomenon is fundamentally rewriting the rules of software development.
Through something called vibe coding.
Yes, vibe coding.
It's a term that's been everywhere lately. Coined by OpenAI co-founder Andrej Karpathy in early 2025, it is exactly what it sounds like. It's the practice of typing what you want in plain conversational English, while AI tools like Cursor, Replit, or Claude actually generate, insert, and execute the underlying code.
Right, and the central question we are exploring today is this. Does vibe coding genuinely democratize software creation for absolute beginners, completely removing the technical floor?
Or does it create a deeply misleading barrier? One that gives a false sense of security and leaves non-technical users completely stranded the moment things inevitably break.
We are basing our discussion on a fascinating recent analysis documenting a true beginner's zero-knowledge attempt to build a highly practical software tool.
And, my position is that this phenomenon is wildly overhyped. I argue it falsely equates building a fragile prototype with actual software engineering, ultimately creating a new insidious digital divide built on error detection barriers.
Well, I take the opposite stance. My position is that vibe coding successfully obliterates the traditional barriers to entry, allowing lay people to build actual real-world solutions without knowing a lick of syntax.
Let's see how that holds up.
Let's start by grounding this in the origin story detailed in our source material, because I think it perfectly captures the reality of this democratic promise.
Right, the story about the beginner.
Yeah, we aren't talking about a tech enthusiast here. We are talking about a layperson with an unbroken 25-year streak of zero coding knowledge.
Literally no background.
None. No bootcamp curiosity, no HTML tampering in the MySpace days, no weekend side projects, just a complete blank slate.
Until an ordinary, frustrating life event happens. The dog in the park.
Exactly. The dog. A low and thick dog in a city park basically T-bones this person's mother, snapping her right tibia.
Ouch.
Yeah, it's awful. And what follows is the kind of mundane logistical nightmare we have all faced. Her father ends up burning countless hours navigating automated medical phone trees, just trying to coordinate basic post-op care.
It's that grinding, repetitive frustration.
That specific misery became the catalyst. Using vibe coding, this zero-knowledge individual successfully built a custom software tool, an automated script to cut through that phone tree chaos.
Which is an impressive feat for sure.
It is. 5 years ago, this person would have been entirely locked out of software creation. The sequence of human problem solving has fundamentally shifted from problem, then hire a developer, to problem, then a desperate plain English attempt at a solution.
I hear that. But
The barrier to entry hasn't just lowered, it has evaporated. That proves the democratization we've been promised is real.
the story of the broken tibia and the phone tree tool is incredibly compelling, I won't deny that. But we have to look past the emotional resonance of the success story.
How do you mean?
We have to examine the mechanics of what is actually happening. The magic of vibe coding, as portrayed right now, is largely an illusion that completely flattens the technical reality of the beginner experience.
An illusion? That seems harsh.
Well, the source text rightly points out a massive blind spot. The vast majority of the breathless coverage around vibe coding comes from developers who are pretending to be non-technical.
Ah, you mean they are adopting a beginner's mindset to test the tools?
Right, but they can't erase their own expertise. They already possess highly structured mental models. They already understand what a repository is, a structured filing cabinet for code.
Sure, they know the terminology.
It's more than terminology. They know how dependencies work, meaning they understand how different pieces of borrowed code rely on each other to function.
For these people, getting an AI to generate code is just automating the easy, tedious half of their job.
Okay, but what about the actual non-technical people, like our zero-knowledge beginner?
For a true non-techie, error detection is the actual barrier. The celebrated industry loop of prompt, generate, test, and refine completely collapses for a genuine beginner.
Because they can't test it?
Exactly, because they lack the background knowledge to even know what the word test means in a software context. I mean, how do you test a local server if you don't know what a server is? It leads to profound disorientation rather than empowerment.
Wait, but aren't we ignoring the obvious reality of the initial build? I want to push back on this idea of profound disorientation.
Go ahead.
The analysis clearly shows that these AI tools deliver incredibly well on the initial scaffolding. We're talking about basic structure, boilerplate code.
The repetitive stuff?
Yeah, the standard code that just spits a window to open on your screen and simple logic. For a person who hasn't learned a single thing about coding in 2.5 decades, watching a functional application materialize in real time provides a genuine, visceral thrill.
Well, they are getting functional prototypes, I'll give you that.
Exactly. They are getting functional prototypes. Let's go back to my Tokyo analogy. If I am in that foreign city with my translation app, I might not understand a single rule of the syntax.
Right, you couldn't write Japanese yourself.
I couldn't write it at all. But if the app tells the cab driver where to go and I arrive at my hotel safely on the third attempt, I have successfully navigated the city. Period.
But they are getting the appearance of functionality, not a robust system.
But it works. If you're listening to this and you've tried to build a quick app in Cursor this weekend, you probably know exactly what this thrill feels like.
The thrill is real, yes.
So shouldn't we acknowledge that a non-technical user getting a working prototype of a phone tree navigator is a profound historical shift in human capability?
It is a shift in speed, certainly. But the speed of that initial scaffolding is exactly what creates the trap.
A trap?
Yes. The boilerplate appears quickly, but anything requiring contextual judgment, like handling edge cases or pushing that application to a live server where other people can actually use it, produces output from the AI that sounds incredibly confident, but is quietly, structurally wrong.
But the AI can fix its own errors.
Not always. The AI does not flag its own confusion. It simply hallucinates a highly plausible answer. And because the beginner has no independent mental model to evaluate that answer, they implement it blindly.
So you think the translation app analogy breaks down?
I do. Your translation app analogy actually breaks down here because software isn't a simple cab ride.
How so?
It gets you from point A to point B because it's more like using an AI architect to design a house. You type, "Build me a beautiful Victorian home," and in 10 seconds, it generates a flawless, stunning 3D blueprint.
Which sounds amazing for a beginner.
To the layman, the blueprint looks perfect, but the AI forgot to include load-bearing walls. It looks like a house, it feels like a house, but the moment you try to actually build it, the roof caves in.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
The beginner suddenly hits a complexity wall they cannot scale because the AI has guided them into a structural dead end that was completely invisible during the thrilling generation phase.
I hear that, but framing it as a dead end feels overly fatalistic. The wall you're describing isn't necessarily a flaw in the democratization process.
What is it then?
It's just a shift in where the friction lies. In the past, the friction was entirely at the starting line. It was pure syntax.
Right, setting up the environment.
Exactly. You couldn't even start building that phone tree app if you didn't know how to declare a variable in Python or set up a development environment. You were locked out on day one.
That is true.
Now, the friction has simply moved from the syntax to the feedback loop.
But that friction in the feedback loop is actively fatal to the project. The mental scaffolding required to process errors is completely absent for true beginners.
But they can learn it.
Not easily. Concrete concepts that feel trivially obvious to anyone with even minor coding exposure simply do not exist as background knowledge for them.
Like what?
Think about the fundamental difference between writing code in a text editor and actually executing that code in a runtime environment. The actual engine where the code lives, breathes, and executes.
Right.
To an experienced developer, an error message in that environment is a highly useful diagnostic tool. It tells you exactly what went wrong, on what line, and why.
And for a beginner?
When a genuine beginner looks at an error in the runtime environment, it's just a terrifying wall of red, hostile text.
It might as well be alien hieroglyphics.
I'll admit, when we talk about the sheer intimidation factor of a terminal throwing a stack trace, that giant cascade of error codes your computer spits out when it crashes, it is definitely daunting.
It's a terrible user experience.
It is. But I'm not convinced by your argument because it assumes the beginner has to learn to read the stack trace the way a senior engineer does.
Well, they have to fix the error somehow.
They don't have to read it, though. Vibe coding shifts the requirement for mastering technical syntax to developing a different kind of resilience, which is patience with iteration.
Patience?
Yes. You don't need to read the red text. You just copy the red text, paste it back to the AI and say, "This broke, fix it." The tool acts as its own translator.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that mechanism working in practice for complex issues. Let me tell you why, and the source material explicitly backs this up.
Okay, go ahead.
When a non-techie tries to do exactly what you just suggested, pasting the error back into the AI, it creates a vicious cycle. Let's say a listener right now is trying to build a simple scheduling app.
Right, using vibe coding.
Yes. They ask the AI to add a calendar feature. The AI confidently pulls in a code library, a dependency, that handles calendars. But it pulls one that is 3 years out of date.
Okay, fairly common issue.
Exactly. So the app inevitably crashes and spits out that wall of red text. The beginner pastes the text back to the AI.
And the AI fixes it?
No, instead of the AI realizing, oh, I used an outdated calendar library, it hallucinates. It confidently tries to rewrite the beginner's entire application to accommodate the broken, outdated library.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And the non-techie has no idea the structural vandalism is happening. They prompt the AI, receive an output, and have no idea whether it actually worked because they don't know how to verify it independently.
So they're stuck.
They are relying on the very system that created the error to diagnose the error. That is the spiral.
But eventually, through iteration, the AI often course corrects.
Not reliably. The beginner spirals into utter confusion because the underlying scaffolding that makes vibe coding powerful for a developer is missing.
You mean knowing what to ask?
Right. Knowing to say, hey, Claude, check the version of that calendar dependency. That is the exact scaffolding the non-techie never built.
I see.
Calling that just a matter of patience with iteration vastly understates the cognitive and emotional cost to the user trying to cross that gap. It is exhausting, and it is why so many beginners abandon their projects at the 80% mark.
You make the spiral sound like a permanent failure state, like a black hole they can't escape.
For many, it is.
But let's zoom out and look at what the user is actually doing in that moment of friction. They are learning a new, completely accessible skill.
Which is?
The hidden discipline of natural language prompting. Vibe coding requires you to communicate with absolute clarity. Precision, specificity, and structure in plain English become the actual tools of creation.
That's a steep learning curve in itself.
But the user isn't failing when they iterate. They are learning how to articulate a logical problem to a machine. And I want to challenge you on this directly.
Go for it.
Isn't learning to speak with rigorous precision in your native language fundamentally more accessible for the average person than memorizing the abstract mathematical syntax of a programming language? I mean, English is essentially the new Python.
It sounds infinitely more accessible, yes. But in practice, treating natural language as a programming language is entirely deceptive.
Deceptive how?
It feels like a free pass because we use it every day. We assume that because we can easily order a coffee in English, we can architect a software system in English.
Well, we have to be more specific than ordering coffee.
Exactly. Human conversation relies heavily on shared context, assumed knowledge, and nonverbal cues. When you bring that conversational vagueness to an AI, vague requests produce vague results.
But the AI asks clarifying questions now. It prompts you back.
Sometimes. But often, ambiguous phrasing just sends the AI in the wrong direction with full conviction. The text points out that this discipline of structured, logical English is something nobody actually teaches up front.
That's true. It is a learned skill.
Beginners arrive at vibe coding platforms expecting the hard part to be the technical stuff. They are completely blindsided to discover that the hard part is learning to think and communicate with machine-like clarity.
Do you have an example?
Sure. For example, They don't know they have to be incredibly precise about state management, which is essentially how an app remembers what a user clicked on page 1 when they finally get to page 3.
Right, keeping track of data across the session.
Exactly. They don't give the AI instructions on state management because they don't know that concept exists. So the AI guesses, usually poorly, and the app breaks in ways natural language can't easily describe.
Right. But if we look at it from the user side, yes, they don't know what state management is, but they do know what their problem is.
Their real-world problem.
Yes. Returning to our material, the person knew their father was stuck on hold with a medical provider. They understood the logistics of their specific grinding frustration.
I agree, they knew their domain.
They possessed the deep domain expertise of their own life. By forcing them to articulate that problem clearly to the AI, vibe coding bridges the gap between their lived domain expertise and a software solution.
But does it really bridge the gap if the software breaks?
Even if it requires them to learn to be more specific over time, the fact that they can end up with a tool that actually runs, that they built from scratch, proves the floor is fundamentally lower.
I'm not so sure.
I think the democratization is real, even if the ceiling hasn't moved much. A motivated non-techie can build something that works.
I think we need to exercise some definitional precision here.
What do you mean?
Because the language we use to describe this technology shapes the outcomes and expectations for the people using it. The phrase "anyone can code now" is actively harmful.
Harmful? How?
It conflates two very different activities, prototyping and engineering. The text makes a brilliant point that we must replace "anyone can code now" with "anyone can prototype now."
Wait, but blaming the terminology feels like a cop-out to me.
It's not a cop-out.
Whether we call it prototyping or coding, they still built a working tool that navigated a medical phone tree. Why does the label matter if the real-world problem is solved?
The label matters because it sets up a very specific kind of psychological failure, and it obscures a widening digital divide.
A psychological failure?
Yes. When we conflate prototyping with engineering, beginners believe they are building robust software. They build a prototype. It inevitably breaks when they hit the limits of the AI's contextual judgment.
Like a broken API connection?
Exactly. Like when the app stops talking to the internet correctly. And because they were told they were coding and the marketing told them it was easy, they blame themselves. They conclude they aren't smart enough.
So they hit the complexity wall, and the terminology makes the crash feel like a personal failure rather than a tool limitation.
Exactly. And worse, it obscures what is actually happening in the broader landscape.
Which is?
Think about it. If a true beginner and a moderately tech-literate user both start using vibe coding today, who wins out? The moderately tech-literate user, the one who understands what a database does, who knows how to read an error log, who knows what a load-bearing wall is in our house metaphor. They will pull ahead incredibly fast.
Because the AI acts as a massive multiplier for their existing mental models.
Precisely. Meanwhile, the true beginner hits the complexity wall and stops. So instead of truly democratizing software creation, we are supercharging those who already have surface-level knowledge.
While leaving the true beginner stranded at the prototype phase.
Yes, blaming themselves for not being able to diagnose a cascading dependency error.
That is a very real dynamic, though I would still look at the net positive.
You still see it as a net positive?
Absolutely. Even if we accept your reframe, that we should call it "anyone can prototype now" instead of "anyone can code," that is still a monumental, world-changing shift.
It's significant, yes.
Prototyping a custom software idea used to cost tens of thousands of dollars or require months of grueling learning. Now, someone facing a mundane misery can validate an idea over a single weekend.
Assuming they don't get stuck in the spiral.
Even if they hit that complexity wall and have to make a smart decision about whether to hire a developer or spend a month learning system architecture themselves, they are still miles ahead of where they were 5 years ago.
I suppose they do have something to show for it.
They have a tangible artifact to show a developer. They aren't just bringing a vague idea on a napkin, They are bringing a functional, albeit fragile model. That fundamentally changes the power dynamic of who gets to initiate software projects in our society.
It certainly changes the starting line. I will absolutely concede that point.
It's a huge step forward.
Vibe coding makes the initial visualization and validation of an idea accessible to almost anyone with the weekend and some patience. But we cannot ignore what the material tells us about the absolute limits of this technology as it exists today.
The limits are real, certainly.
It cannot reliably explain why something fails in a way a true beginner can intuitively act on. It severely lacks the pedagogical scaffolding, the built-in teaching tools, to help a user transition from a fragile prototype to a robust, secure application.
Right. That transition is still the bottleneck.
And until the technology platforms can bridge that specific gap, transitioning from blindly generating boilerplate code to actually helping a user diagnose structural failure, it remains a frustrating dead end for true software engineering for the layperson.
Well, as we wrap up this debate, it is clear we are looking at a profound technological shift through two very different lenses.
Very different indeed.
From my perspective, vibe coding represents a monumental democratization of creation. It allows ordinary people facing real-world, highly specific miseries, like navigating endless medical phone trees after a family emergency, to build functional, custom solutions.
It's a powerful tool for that initial step.
It completely removes the prerequisite of learning abstract syntax, empowering users to translate their domain expertise into software using plain English.
And from my perspective, well, the technology is genuinely impressive for rapidly scaffolding a prototype. It completely lacks the critical, underlying scaffolding needed for error detection and system diagnosis.
The complexity wall.
Exactly. Without an existing mental model of dependencies, file structures, or how to process a runtime error log, true beginners inevitably hit that wall.
And it supercharges those who already know a bit.
Right. It is an incredibly powerful multiplier for those with existing technical knowledge. But for the absolute beginner, it too often ends in a disorienting, hallucinatory spiral rather than true software engineering.
We certainly agree on one thing, though. Vibe coding drastically accelerates the creation of basic logic and structure. The technology gets you off the starting block faster than anything we've ever seen.
Yes, the sheer speed of prototyping is unprecedented.
But our core disagreement remains on whether the inevitable complexity wall negates the democratic promise of the tool, or if it simply redefines where the starting line is for beginners.
Exactly. It ultimately comes down to whether we are willing to be honest about the distinction between scaffolding a fragile idea and engineering a robust software solution.
This analysis opens up so much more to explore, particularly around how future vibe coding platforms might eventually build better error detection scaffolding designed explicitly for non-techies.
Like translating those terrifying stack traces into plain English, too.
Exactly. It leaves us all to evaluate our own readiness to step into this new world. Think back to that sprawling city of Tokyo and the translation app.
A city with no map.
Right. We may not be ready to write the grammar of the local language ourselves, and we might occasionally get totally lost in translation when the app hallucinates our intent and sends us down the wrong alleyway.
It's bound to happen.
But for the first time in history, the gates to the city are wide open to everyone, and the conversation has finally begun. We leave it to you to decide if you're ready to start talking.